Welcome back to our channel World of Royals.
We begin with a house that once symbolized freedom and reinvention, standing bright under the California sun while cameras captured every carefully arranged moment meant to show a new life unfolding. Today, the same property feels quieter, heavier, and surrounded by questions rather than certainty. What changed was not just market pressure or shifting headlines, but the slow realization that independence requires relentless momentum, and momentum is fragile when public trust wavers and institutional ties grow distant, leaving reputation, revenue, and identity exposed to scrutiny from every direction at once, reshaping perception faster than anyone expected or fully understood before. For years, the Montecito estate functioned as visual proof that departure from royal duty could produce stability, prosperity, and narrative control, reinforcing the message that reinvention was not only possible but powerful. Interviews filmed across polished rooms, photographs framed against gardens, and public statements carefully timed for maximum emotional resonance all supported one central idea: life beyond the palace could flourish without compromise. Yet symbols demand maintenance, and when financial strain meets legal uncertainty, even the strongest symbols begin to feel temporary, subject to reassessment by observers tracking every development with growing intensity and persistent curiosity about what happens next. Speculation intensified when analysts began discussing the financial realities of sustaining a property of such scale, reminding audiences that luxury residences operate like complex systems requiring continuous input of resources, attention, and strategic planning. Property taxes, security infrastructure, staffing, maintenance, insurance, and advisory services accumulate steadily, creating pressure that remains manageable only when income flows consistently and reputational stability supports commercial partnerships. Once public perception begins shifting, however, partners grow cautious, negotiations slow, and liquidity becomes a subject of discussion across media, finance, and entertainment sectors simultaneously, amplifying scrutiny with every new report, rumor, analysis, and commentary circulating through global conversations where observers attempt to interpret patterns before official statements ever appear. The absence of clear confirmation often fuels more speculation, because silence invites projection, and projection fills uncertainty with narrative. Over time, repeated questioning shapes perception regardless of factual resolution, especially when the individuals involved occupy global symbolic roles. Royal identity, celebrity influence, and personal storytelling intersect here, creating a communication environment where every gesture, delay, or adjustment becomes material for interpretation, debate, emotional investment, and continuous reanalysis by audiences following developments across continents, languages, platforms, and cultural expectations that rarely align neatly with lived experience or private reality. Meanwhile, the broader commercial landscape surrounding post-royal independence has grown more complex than early optimism suggested, because sustaining global attention requires constant production of meaningful content, compelling partnerships, and consistent public engagement. Initial agreements with major media companies generated extraordinary interest, yet interest alone does not guarantee long-term influence. Audiences evolve, platforms shift, algorithms change, and reputational narratives compete for limited attention. When expectations rise rapidly, maintaining momentum becomes increasingly demanding, especially when personal developments intersect with business strategy, legal considerations, and public interpretation unfolding simultaneously across media cycles that rarely pause for reflection or careful contextual understanding. Another layer of complexity emerges when institutional response enters the picture, because monarchies operate through long timelines shaped by precedent, continuity, and internal governance frameworks that prioritize stability over rapid adaptation. When senior figures emphasize duty, legacy, and structural preservation, their language signals that personal narratives must align with institutional expectations. Observers interpret this emphasis as evidence that boundaries are being clarified, perhaps more explicitly than in previous decades. Whether such clarification represents modernization or rigidity remains debated, but the perception of firmness alone can reshape negotiation dynamics, public expectation, media framing, and long-term strategic positioning for everyone involved. At the center of public curiosity lies the question of reconciliation, because audiences often expect family conflict to resolve through dialogue, compromise, or emotional breakthrough. Yet institutions do not function like private families, and private families do not operate under constitutional pressure. When these two systems collide, resolution becomes slower, more procedural, and often less emotionally satisfying to observers seeking closure. Statements grow measured, timelines extend, and symbolic gestures replace dramatic confrontation. The result can feel distant, even cold, though internally it reflects deliberate efforts to manage complexity without destabilizing structures that depend on continuity, predictability, and disciplined communication across generations who inherit responsibility long before they fully understand its weight. This intergenerational dimension explains why decisions that appear immediate to outsiders are often evaluated internally across decades, not news cycles. For individuals attempting to redefine their roles outside such systems, the adjustment can be profound, requiring new economic models, new communication strategies, and new definitions of identity that no longer depend on inherited structure. Success in that transition depends not only on opportunity but on resilience, adaptability, and sustained credibility across audiences with differing expectations shaped by culture, history, media, narrative, perception, memory, loyalty, skepticism, curiosity, judgment, interpretation, and emotion that rarely settles into consensus. Public sympathy shifts repeatedly, sometimes leaning toward personal struggle, sometimes toward institutional preservation, depending on which narrative dominates the moment. Media framing plays a decisive role, highlighting certain details while minimizing others, shaping emotional response as much as factual understanding. Over time, repeated exposure to conflict can produce fatigue, yet high-stakes family stories maintain enduring fascination because they combine intimacy with power, vulnerability with status, and personal emotion with structural consequence, creating narratives that feel simultaneously private and historic to audiences watching from cultural distances shaped by their own values, experiences, expectations, and assumptions about responsibility. When divorce enters such a public landscape, every existing tension intensifies because separation restructures finances, authority, and decision-making. Negotiations once handled privately become subjects of speculation, while legal confidentiality creates information gaps that observers attempt to fill with inference. Custody arrangements, asset distribution, and communication boundaries all influence future stability. When these factors intersect with global symbolic identity, their implications extend beyond personal life, affecting branding, partnerships, public credibility, and long-term narrative direction in ways difficult to predict yet impossible to ignore for anyone tracking developments with analytical interest, historical awareness, cultural curiosity, emotional investment, and persistent attention. Reports suggesting confidential legal proceedings have circulated widely, though verified details remain limited. This pattern reinforces a familiar dynamic. The less confirmed information available, the more expansive interpretation becomes. Analysts construct models, commentators propose scenarios, and audiences assemble fragmented data into coherent stories that feel complete even when significant elements remain unknown. In such environments, perception often influences outcomes directly because partners, investors, and institutions respond not only to facts but to anticipated trajectories. If uncertainty appears prolonged, caution becomes rational, reshaping opportunity structures before definitive resolution ever emerges publicly, leaving individuals navigating realities shaped partly by expectation rather than confirmation. Within this shifting environment, identity becomes central because public figures rely on recognizable narratives to maintain influence. For someone born into monarchy, identity is historically structured, reinforced by ceremony, tradition, and collective memory. For someone entering from outside, identity is constructed through voice, perspective, and personal narrative. When those two identity systems separate, each must redefine itself independently, a process that can generate creative opportunity but also profound instability. Audiences watch closely, comparing past expectations with present reality, measuring consistency, authenticity, adaptability, resilience, growth, coherence, transparency, credibility, narrative clarity, strategic direction, emotional tone, symbolic meaning, and long-term viability. Children add another dimension because their lives unfold beyond immediate strategic calculation. They inherit circumstances created before they could understand them, yet eventually interpret those circumstances through personal experience. Decisions made today about visibility, residence, education, and cultural affiliation will shape identity formation years later, when public attention may have moved elsewhere. Institutions consider continuity, parents consider protection, audiences consider symbolism. Balancing these perspectives requires negotiation across emotional, legal, cultural, and historical frameworks that rarely align perfectly, ensuring that any outcome reflects compromise, trade-offs, adjustments, recalibration, reinterpretation, and ongoing adaptation to circumstances that continue evolving beyond immediate visibility in unpredictable ways. Meanwhile, financial sustainability remains a practical constraint shaping every strategic decision. Revenue streams tied to media production, publishing, public speaking, and partnerships depend heavily on audience trust. Trust itself depends on coherence between message and perception. If perception becomes fragmented, monetization becomes uncertain. Large assets then transform from symbols of success into financial obligations requiring careful evaluation. Selling such an asset does not necessarily signal failure. Sometimes it reflects strategic repositioning. Yet when symbolism is deeply embedded in public narrative, practical decisions carry emotional interpretation that extends far beyond financial calculation, influencing memory, meaning, legacy, and historical interpretation. The possibility of relocation, therefore, invites deeper questions about belonging. Geographic space carries symbolic weight, especially when associated with reinvention. Leaving one residence for another can represent adaptation, retreat, renewal, or recalibration, depending on perspective. Canada suggests diplomatic familiarity. California suggests industry proximity. Europe suggests historical continuity. Each option communicates narrative direction. Yet the most significant location may be psychological, involving how individuals understand themselves after profound transition. Identity is not fixed by geography. It evolves through experience, reflection, challenge, response, growth, setback, learning, resilience, reinvention, recalibration, narrative, memory, meaning, purpose, connection, separation, continuity, transformation, adaptation, negotiation, and time that reshapes perspective gradually. Observers often focus on immediate drama, but long-term consequences emerge slowly, sometimes invisibly. Institutional adjustments implemented during periods of conflict may persist for generations, influencing governance structures long after public attention fades. Similarly, personal decisions made under pressure can shape relationships for decades. Historians frequently reinterpret such moments later, identifying turning points invisible to contemporary participants. What feels chaotic now may eventually appear structured in retrospect, revealing patterns connecting decision, response, adaptation, consequence, narrative, memory, identity, continuity, transformation, institutional learning, cultural interpretation, generational perspective, symbolic meaning, emotional residue, and evolving historical understanding across time. Scales far beyond individual experience. Public debate often simplifies these complexities, framing events as moral choices between right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal, freedom and duty. Reality rarely fits such binaries. Human motivation includes fear, hope, obligation, love, pride, uncertainty, and evolving understanding. Institutions respond through policy, precedent, and risk assessment. When these frameworks interact, outcomes reflect negotiation rather than victory. Observers searching for simple resolution may feel dissatisfied, yet complexity itself is often the defining feature of moments that reshape cultural understanding of power, family, identity, responsibility, legitimacy, continuity, memory, narrative, symbolism, meaning, consequence, interpretation, adaptation, resilience, transformation, and legacy extending across generations. The present moment, therefore, represents not an ending but a transition, one that will likely be interpreted differently over time. Some will see institutional strength, others will see personal loss. Some will emphasize responsibility, others autonomy. Competing narratives will coexist, each supported by selective evidence and emotional emphasis. As years pass, memory will compress complexity into symbolic moments, simplifying what once felt overwhelming. Historians will reconstruct timelines, biographers will interpret motives, participants will reflect privately, and audiences will revisit questions about power, choice, consequence, responsibility, identity, continuity, transformation, memory, narrative, interpretation, perspective, meaning, legacy, history, and human experience unfolding beyond headlines. For the children, however, lived reality will matter more than narrative. Their understanding of family, belonging, and identity will develop through daily life, relationships, education, and personal reflection. Public debate may shape environment, but private experience shapes memory. Years from now, when they interpret their childhood, they will do so through individual perspective, not collective expectation. Their voices, if ever expressed publicly, could redefine this entire chapter, because first-hand experience carries authority no commentary can replicate, reshaping understanding of intention, impact, consequence, meaning, narrative, legacy, identity, continuity, transformation, family, memory, history, culture, perception, empathy, and interpretation across future generations. Until then, observers must rely on partial information, evolving context, and informed speculation. The Montecito property, once celebrated as proof of reinvention, now functions as a focal point for broader questions about sustainability, symbolism, and narrative durability. Whether sold, retained, or repurposed, its meaning has already shifted, demonstrating how physical space reflects psychological and cultural transition. Buildings hold memory, but memory changes as circumstances evolve, transforming symbols into historical markers that future observers will analyze for insight into ambition, adaptation, conflict, resilience, identity, continuity, transformation, perception, narrative, meaning, legacy, time, experience, consequence, memory, history, culture, and change that defines human experience. In the immediate present, however, attention remains fixed on practical developments. Financial planning, legal negotiation, and strategic repositioning require focus, patience, and adaptability. Public communication must balance transparency with privacy, clarity with restraint. Each statement influences perception, each decision shapes trajectory. The pressure of constant observation intensifies every adjustment, making even routine changes appear significant. Over time, this sustained scrutiny can alter behavior, encouraging caution, deliberation, and controlled pacing in all visible actions, from residence decisions to professional ventures, public appearances, messaging, partnerships, collaborations, negotiations, and long-term strategic planning shaped by evolving context, circumstance, and perception. For many observers, the central question remains emotional rather than procedural: what has been gained, and what has been lost. Institutional stability may strengthen, but personal connection may weaken. Independence may expand, but support structures may contract. Opportunity may diversify, but identity may fragment. These trade-offs define transition, yet they rarely resolve neatly. Instead, they accumulate, shaping future experience gradually. Observers interpret outcomes according to values, emphasizing loyalty, autonomy, responsibility, protection, ambition, resilience, adaptation, transformation, continuity, change, memory, narrative, symbolism, meaning, legitimacy, identity, consequence, perspective, judgment, empathy, analysis, reflection, curiosity, interpretation, engagement, debate, discussion, understanding, uncertainty, complexity, and ongoing conversation. That conversation extends beyond any single event because public memory integrates multiple moments into overarching narrative. The departure from royal duty, the establishment of independent ventures, the emergence of conflict, the possibility of financial recalibration, and the redefinition of family structure collectively form a sequence that observers interpret as a single unfolding story. Each chapter reframes previous chapters, altering meaning. What once signified liberation may later signify transition. What once appeared conflictual may later appear structural. Narrative evolves continuously, shaped by time, distance, reflection, reinterpretation, perspective, context, evidence, memory, emotion, identity, culture, history, meaning, symbolism, legacy, consequence, and reinterpretation across generations. For the individuals involved, however, daily life continues regardless of narrative framing. Practical responsibilities demand attention. Parenting, professional commitments, financial management, personal well-being, and long-term planning. The work of rebuilding stability often occurs quietly, without spectacle. Adaptation involves routine, discipline, and incremental progress, not dramatic transformation. Public expectation favors visible turning points, yet most change unfolds gradually. Over months and years, patterns stabilize, new identities form, relationships adjust, priorities clarify, goals shift, strategies evolve, perspectives mature, memories settle, narratives integrate, experiences accumulate, resilience strengthens, meaning deepens, continuity emerges, and life proceeds within contexts shaped by ongoing change and adaptation. The broader public may eventually shift attention elsewhere as new events capture interest, yet institutional and personal consequences continue unfolding beyond headlines. Policies developed during crisis remain embedded within governance structures. Relationships altered by conflict rarely revert completely. Financial decisions shape opportunity long afterward. The sale or retention of a property may appear symbolic, but symbolism influences memory and memory influences legacy. Over decades, historians trace these threads, connecting events once perceived as isolated into patterns revealing transformation within institutions, families, cultures, narratives, identities, expectations, perceptions, meanings, interpretations, consequences, adaptations, resilience, continuity, change, memory, history, experience, and time reshaping perspective continually. As observers reflect on the present moment, they often ask whether different choices might have produced different outcomes. Counterfactual thinking offers emotional release, yet reality unfolds through decisions made within specific constraints. Information is incomplete, pressure is immediate, and consequences are uncertain. Participants act without full foresight. Later analysis benefits from distance, but distance cannot alter what has occurred. Understanding this distinction encourages humility in judgment, recognizing complexity, contingency, uncertainty, limitation, perspective, interpretation, memory, narrative, consequence, responsibility, identity, continuity, transformation, adaptation, resilience, growth, learning, reflection, awareness, empathy, patience, context, evidence, meaning, legacy, history, culture, experience, and human fallibility. Ultimately, the unfolding situation illustrates how modern celebrity, ancient monarchy, global media, and private family life intersect in unprecedented ways. Technology amplifies visibility, accelerating reaction cycles. Economic systems reward attention, intensifying narrative competition. Institutional frameworks preserve continuity, resisting rapid change. Personal emotion seeks connection, understanding, and belonging. These forces operate simultaneously, shaping outcomes no single actor fully controls. The result is complexity that defies simple narrative, producing stories that evolve continuously, inviting analysis, debate, reflection, interpretation, reevaluation, understanding, empathy, curiosity, engagement, discussion, learning, awareness, perspective, insight, meaning, memory, continuity, transformation, adaptation, resilience, identity, legacy, history, culture, experience, and shared human understanding. The quiet uncertainty surrounding Montecito therefore represents more than a potential real estate decision. It symbolizes transition between narratives. Once framed as arrival, it now suggests reassessment. Such shifts occur whenever ambition encounters constraint. The meaning of place evolves alongside the meaning of identity. Observers project interpretation, but lived experience remains uniquely personal. Over time, the physical structure will matter less than the decisions made within it, decisions that influence direction, possibility, consequence, memory, narrative, meaning, identity, continuity, transformation, resilience, adaptation, perspective, legacy, history, culture, experience, interpretation, reflection, awareness, understanding, empathy, connection, separation, belonging, change, time, and future unfolding gradually. As this chapter continues developing, the central truth remains simple. Stories rarely end where observers expect. Instead, they transform, branching into new narratives shaped by decisions still unfolding. Financial recalibration, personal reinvention, institutional adaptation, and generational reflection will continue interacting long after immediate attention fades. The individuals involved will keep living, choosing, adjusting, learning, responding, evolving, growing, redefining identity, pursuing stability, seeking meaning, building connection, navigating uncertainty, shaping memory, influencing narrative, leaving traces that historians will later examine for insight into power, family, change, resilience, continuity, transformation, identity, legacy, history, culture, experience, meaning, memory, interpretation, perspective, and what endures beyond headlines. For now, observers remain watching, interpreting, debating, and questioning what the future may hold. The sale or retention of Montecito will matter, but only as part of a larger transformation still unfolding. Identity is being renegotiated, institutions are redefining boundaries, and memory is forming in real time. Years from now, interpretation will continue evolving, shaped by voices not yet heard, perspectives not yet formed, experiences not yet lived. Until then, the story remains open, unfinished, complex, contested, evolving, layered, human, emotional, institutional, symbolic, historical, generational, consequential, reflective, uncertain, unfolding, remembered, debated, analyzed, interpreted, questioned, and continuously